We're going to have a look at the endocrine system today and see if we can find out something about that and what it does. If we think about the endocrine system, then what we're doing is having a look at basically this substance, the dreaded hormones. Now, hormones, especially in young people, especially has a sort of a bad name, but in fact hormones aren't just about one thing or another. They are about chemicals that affect the whole body. So we have the nerves, and these affect just one thing, whereas a hormone is basically a chemical carried in the bloodstream to all parts of the body. And because it carries to all parts of the body, it can have an effect here on several, if you like, different organs, tissues, or whatever. The classic one is then you are sitting here and suddenly brought in here is our lion, and you see the lion, and basically you release a hormone. You release the hormone adrenaline, and this is now going to go to all parts of the body. It's going to go to things like the heart and say, look, we're going to have to either run for our lives or fight this thing. It's got to go to the lungs because we've got to say the same thing. So we've got to increase our heart rate to get more blood. We've got to get all the oxygen we can so that we can run faster. We want to basically shut down systems that we're not going to need. We're not going to need too much about the skin. We're not going to need too much about the kidneys. Basically, the reason for this is very simple. If you're running for your life, producing that extra bit of clean sort of blood in the kidneys is not going to be important. You're going to basically be fighting here for your life. So we're after getting certain priorities right. So hormones here, a very simple example, is just getting you ready for what we call fight or flight. Do bear in mind, of course, if you're being chased by a lion, that the lion can probably run faster than you can, and the lion can probably climb better than you can. However, if there are two of you, the system is very simple. How fast do you need to run to outrun the lion? And that is very simple. You only need to run faster than your friend. Ah, that's a bit cruel, wasn't it? Right, so the hormone system is basically called the endocrine system. And the endocrine system has a series of quite a few different glands. These are the endocrine glands, and they produce different hormones. And some glands can produce more than one hormone. So let's have a quick look at some of these different glands and see what we can about them. So there are a whole variety of different glands, and let's just quickly have a look at what they are. So this is from the hormonesaustralia.org.au, and they got a very good thing on hormones. So we've got here the male and the female, and one's done side on so you can just have better look. At the top then we've got the pineal gland, which is for setting up things like your melatonin, your basic rhythms of the body. We've got the pituitary gland, which is responsible for controlling things like growth hormone, as well as other things like ADH, antidiuretic hormone, controlling the amount of water. We've got the hypothalamus, and this is designed to basically take the stats of the body, I suppose, is a way of trying to put it. Work out how much water, sugar, temperature in the blood. We've got the thyroid and the parathyroid glands, and these have really got a job of controlling the metabolic rate of the body. We've got the thymus gland, which not covered in very many syllabuses. Perhaps a little bit more on that one in a minute. Pancreas, well known for producing insulin. As I've mentioned, the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys, designed to produce this adrenaline, this fight and flight hormone. And then, depending on whether you're male or female, you have a choice of different systems. Female, you've got the ovaries that produce all the different hormones for the menstrual cycle, and the placenta, which only really gets going during pregnancy, which will produce some of the pregnancy hormones. Or if you're male, you don't have either the ovary or the placenta hormones, but you do have from the testes the male sex hormones. So we've got quite a few endocrine glands to sort of control and release the hormones, and the particular hormones that we produce here are things like they've got here, to discover some of the ones you can have a look at: the thyroid gland, parathyroid, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, pineal gland, pancreas, ovaries and testes. So there are quite a lot of those. There are quite a few more glands we meet in the body, but these are not endocrine glands. So we may have glands that produce chemicals that go down a particular tube into the digestive system or somewhere else, but we're interested in those that basically secrete directly into the bloodstream. So we have the endocrine system with all these different hormones. So we've got things like pituitary gland. Let's just put some of these down. So we've got things like here for growth hormone. So especially in younger people, this is controlling basically how well they grow. We've got other hormones that will perhaps stimulate the thyroid gland. We might have here in women hormones that are going to produce and release eggs, things like perhaps follicle stimulating hormone. In fact, it's present in men as well. This hormone also stimulates the testes to make sperm, and the male sex hormone testosterone. We've got the thyroid gland, And the thyroid gland here is basically designed to control the metabolic rate. I haven't done all of these, so let's do the pineal gland. Mum's busy as well. Right, so pineal gland here is controlling sort of, I suppose, the rhythms of the body. As a way of looking at this. We've got other glands that are interesting, but let's go on. Look at the pancreas. Pancreas, well known for its producing of insulin in the cells of the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans, and glucagon in the alpha cells of the islets of Langerhans in the pancreas. Lovely name. And these control the sugar levels of the body. We've got the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands here are really for dealing with stressful situations, I suppose. We'll put it down as the flight-fight situation. We've then got the ovaries, and these obviously deal with the female development. Placenta, and this only gets involved in pregnancy. And we've got the testes, which are basically for controlling the male development. So we've got a whole load of these different glands, and it's sort of, if we try to sort of say what they're used for, they're used for controlling bone and muscle health. They're used for controlling the heart function and the blood pressure. They're used for metabolism and how foods are basically broken down by the body to make energy. They're used in the sexual development and reproduction system. They're used in growth and development. They're used to help control the immune system, to regulate it. They control people's moods. Very well known, that one. They also affect your attention, your learning, your memory. They control your stress levels. Hormones control your sleep cycles, and they control your appetite and body weight. And as long as they're basically in balance, there's no problem. But if they get out of balance, then you've got a real problem, and that's when all sorts of problems, diseases can basically develop. So hormones responsible for an awful lot, which is why people look at youngsters and they go things like hormones, and it is basically true that you are a sum of all your different hormones. So if we want to try and summarize this little bit, the endocrine system is made up from basically glands. These glands basically secrete hormones, which go directly into the bloodstream, and these are then carried to the target organ. And not just necessarily that target organ. These have slower effects than the nerves, but as well as being slower than nerves, they generally are longer lasting. The one gland that we think of is important is our pituitary gland, and our pituitary gland we think of as our master gland, and this is basically important when we look at the control of the whole body, and it's sort of something that we need to sort of consider. Okay, so there's our first look at those. Now let's choose one of the hormones to have a look at, and the one I want to look at is insulin and glucagon, because what I want to look at is how these control the blood glucose level. And to get an idea about this, let's try and draw a little diagram. And we're going to start off with your happy place. Here we've got just the right amount of glucose in the body. So we're very happy, and the glucose is okay. We've got just the right amount of glucose in the system. Now, unfortunately, what happens at this point is something is going to happen. And basically, what's going to happen is you decide that you're hungry. And what you do is that you eat. And as you eat, the problem we've got is your glucose levels now go up. This is not good. We've now got too much glucose in the body, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So we now send a little signal from the hypothalamus, the master sort of detector, and what this is going to do, it's going to stimulate the pancreas to produce insulin. The insulin is going to remove the glucose and basically put it into storage, and we're now back to being happy because we've got the right amount of glucose in our body. Feels only so easy, but it may be that we actually try something which is frightening to many students, the exercise word. We do some exercise, we do some running around, we do something. And as we do here, basically our glucose level here, it falls. We haven't got enough glucose in our body. We're reaching a crisis. So a signal is sent out to the pancreas, and that is to release the hormone glucagon. Glucagon now goes to the store. It releases some of this stored glucose. It's stored as a chemical called glycogen. And our body returns to its happy place of having just the right amount of glucose in the body. And this is called a negative feedback loop. And it's very common in the body. I'll tell you a true story about how some of this works, and it involves my father. And he was diabetic and he wasn't very well, and he was taking some antibiotics. And what happened was that my mother went in to see him in the morning. He was up doing some stuff, but he'd been quiet for a little while, and she found him unconscious and couldn't rouse him. So, being in England, we dialed 999, and within a few moments the ambulance came, and they very quickly diagnosed him as having a diabetic coma. He was hypoglycemic. He didn't have enough sugar in his body. So they gave him some sugar, stirred him up. They managed to get him to get some sugar in his body, and in a few minutes he was right as rain. He was well again. They didn't take him to hospital. He was fine. They were quite happy with him, and so they left him. Sometime after lunch, he'd had dinner as well, my mother found he was rather quiet, went to find him, and found he was unconscious in a chair. Couldn't rouse him very well at all. Dialed 999, and in fact the same ambulance crew arrived within a few minutes. And immediately they diagnosed what the problem was. This time he'd gone hyperglycemic, too much sugar in the body. And a way around this, they gave him an insulin injection. And within a little while, he was right as rain. They wanted to take him to hospital, but he had a choice, and they were reasonably happy with him. He was okay now, and he'd had 2 little diabetic comas in one day, and that was doing pretty well, really. So they left. Sometime later on in the day, my mother went in to see my father. He'd been quiet for a while. He was unconscious. She dialed 999 for a 3rd time that day. And the same ambulance crew, they were just about to pack up and go home. They arrived. They took one look at him and said, yeah, we know what's wrong with him. And they put him on a gurney and took him in and put him into hospital, because he was on this time a hypoglycemic coma. And he stayed in hospital for about a week till they managed to sort out all these antibiotics were affecting his blood sugar system, and they got him right, and he was right as rain after that. And in fact, because he was good, he went on diets. He didn't exactly do as much exercise as he would have liked, because largely he had 2 gammy knees, so he couldn't do an awful lot, and he was in his late 80s, and he ran around, got fit. Staggered around and got a bit fitter, didn't eat so much and lost a lot of weight, and he got rid of his diabetes. And then he joined in Diabetes UK, going round talking to lots of other people, trying to say, look, this is what you ought to do, because, listen to me, I've had diabetes and this is the problem it's caused. Yeah, so you can have fun with these hormones if things start to go wrong. Right, let's have a look then a little bit more about insulin. So we've decided that insulin here is going to do something. So what's it going to do? So insulin is basically a hormone, and if you have got lots of glucose in the body, this is not so good for you. You need a certain amount. So what insulin does, it manages to take the glucose and convert it to glycogen. Now this is soluble and it is osmotically active. Now by that I mean it's going to attract a lot of water, and this can affect the body in not a good way. What we can do is turn it into glycogen. This is insoluble and it's a carbohydrate, and it can be stored in the liver and the muscles. I suppose we think of it as just stored in virtually all cells here. And this glycogen can be converted back into glucose as and when it's needed, so that you can keep your glucose level within a very narrow range. So our glucose basically stays within a very narrow range. So that helps us trying to do anything important, but insulin does cause a few problems, much more so than the other one, which is glucagon, because we've got glucagon here, and this takes our glycogen and converts it back into glucose. So the control of the blood glucose level isn't just controlled by insulin, but is controlled by, if we almost think of this as an antagonistic pair. When the glucose level in the blood falls below the ideal range, then glucagon is produced, and it makes your liver typically break down glycogen into glucose, which is then released back into the bloodstream. By using these two hormones and by using this glycogen store, which we mentioned here, which in fact is in the liver, then what we could do is we can control this blood glucose level within a very narrow range. And we've got this negative feedback loop that basically says that if we've got something, then we get rid of it and we change it so that we keep the ideal level. So let's look then next at diabetes. One of the big problems, I suppose, of the current century diabetes, probably one of these really severe illnesses that we have, and it can be largely avoided. We've got two sorts of diabetes. We've got type 1. Now, there's not much you can do about type 1, because this basically means that your pancreas here, it doesn't produce enough So we haven't got enough insulin. Without insulin, your blood levels can get very high after you eat. Eventually, I suppose, your kidneys will start to excrete glucose in your urine, and that's going to make the urine more osmotically active. So this is going to make your urine, sort of more urine being produced, and therefore you're going to feel thirsty all the time. Without insulin, glucose can't get into the cells of the body either, so you lack energy, you feel tired, and your body needs to break down fat and protein and use that as a fuel instead, so you start to lose weight. Type 1 diabetes either starts in young children, which basically means you're basically born with this, or it can happen to teenagers, and many start about this, and it's probably got something to do with puberty as your body changes. For this, the only cure really is injections of insulin. And injections of insulin can cause a problem. I had a girlfriend before I was married who was diabetic. In fact, I had two friends who were diabetic. One was ill with diabetes, the other one had a nuisance called diabetes. Both had exactly the same problem. One treated it as an illness, the other one just got on with her life. And all they needed to do was work out how hungry they were going to be, how much food they were going to eat, and therefore how much insulin they were going to need to sort of give themselves. And they could then do some sort of feedback with some sort of monitor. Type 2 diabetes generally comes with age. Generally, it comes with obesity. Generally, it comes with lack of exercise. And not exclusively any of those. We can have people that are young, thin, who run around a lot, they could still get type 2 diabetes. But we're talking about here generally. Most people are going to be older, most people are going to be overweight, and most people are going to have a lack of exercise. But this is still linked to being genetic. You've got to have the genes there first to allow this to happen. The pancreas here still makes insulin, but probably not enough. So pancreas makes less insulin than required. Or I suppose your body could stop responding properly to insulin. So yeah, or your body stops responding properly. As to why, become a doctor. Right, so where's this particularly bad? Well, if I just want to pick on two countries, then USA, and following close on their heels, the UK, we see that insulin problems, type 2 diabetes, is rising in both of those countries. Why? Well, sadly, I think it's due to an aging population. Sadly, it is due to a fatter population. Alexa, stop. Good. Beat it to it. And what we have also is generally, I suppose, a lack of exercise in the population. I'm too busy to do exercise. I'm running around doing my job that I haven't got a chance to do this, that and the other. So we've got these problems. If we can solve these problems, well, aging population, I don't know if there's much we can really do about that one. Living longer is probably a good thing. Obesity, we can do something about. We can try to educate people to be and eat more healthily. And we can try to get people to do more exercise. And doing that might get rid of type 2 diabetes. How do we treat diabetes? Well, type 1, there's not much choice really. Type 1 here, we've basically got to put in some insulin, and that is going to be an injection. Diabetes used to be a real problem trying to get hold of the insulin. Now we can actually grow this in bacteria, so getting around this problem is much easier. But these insulin injections treating diabetes do it really well, but they don't cure it. So we've got to look for here a cure. What could we do here? Well, you could have a pancreas transplant, I suppose. That really would work. But these operations are difficult, they're risky, and how many pancreases are there available for this type of problem? And if you have a transplant, then you have to go on to different meds, all these immunosuppressants. So you're swapping one problem for another. Another way might be here just to transplant some cells. Probably the way that we will go, to try and put in cells into the pancreas to try and cure the problem. This is a good area of research, but it's not effective yet. The problem with these things is that of rejection. Your cells know who they are and what they are, and they look at some of these other cells and say they're foreign, and then they try to get rid of them. So, a big problem here. So, there's not a lot we can do. We can treat the disease with injections, but as for the cure, I think that's still a way off. Type 2 diabetes, well, there's various things we could do here. I suppose you could lose weight. That's going to help quite a bit. Do more exercise. And I suppose we can control some of this by having a better diet. And if this doesn't work, then we could do the injections of insulin. We might find some sort of drugs that sort of help the pancreas. And we might be able to find ways of stopping the amount of glucose you absorb from your gut. With an aging population, we're getting more of these, but we are also seeing more type 2 diabetes in younger people, and that can only be due to probably this idea of obesity and the need to lose weight, and diet, and try and do more and more exercise to try and help the situation. There we are, some stuff on one hormone in the endocrine system. We'll have a look at some more in another lesson. So until then, if you like this, subscribe and click the like button, and I will see you then next week when we'll do some more biology for GCSE topic by topic. Until then, bye bye.